Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Matthew Mickey here, and we're going to start a three-part series where we discuss how to build distribution of returns using the money supply. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about how I approach, you know, any trade that I do within the market, right? So I always refer back to the 5 principles of patrolings, and that's an infantryman's must in the Army. So those are planning, reconnaissance, security, control, and common sense. And it all starts with planning. So, planning is how we analyze any possible variables that we have. And this is the first part of stacking the probabilities in our favor as the best army in the world. And then we conduct reconnaissance, right, of the objective of the enemy. So that's us analyzing what they've done historically, what their current trends are right now. So planning and reconnaissance allow us to find the probabilities of actions that's going to happen on the objective, which allows us to rehearse for those. And then security is us constantly keeping our guard up. And I'm breaking this down in a civilian mindset so you guys can understand it if you're not infantry, And then control and common sense we'll hit on later in the course, but right now we're going to focus on the planning and reconnaissance part. Okay, but before we do that, a quick overview and let's start pulling this stuff together. So far we talked about how to use government and corporate bonds to spot liquidity and money flow in the market, right? And we can use these leading indicators that we discussed, such as real interest rates, yield curve, corporate bonds, and stock market volatility, to start building our portfolio biased towards market direction for the S&P 500. Now remember, the S&P 500 is the impulse of the economy, and I've shown you in previous videos how the S&P on a 6-month lag determines the direction of the GDP. The GDP and the S&P 500 determines corporate earnings. Okay? And so we will be able to use all these tools that we've discussed so far to predict our lagging indicators, such as the GDP and earnings outlooks for the futures. Using liquidity, volatility direction, and average true range shows us is growth accelerating or decelerating. Now, we also discussed the Fed Reserve having dual mandates and how the Fed Reserve has two main mandates, right? Inflation and unemployment, with a spice of maintaining a healthy market while balancing the first two, right? And we know the tools that they do use to accomplish these mandates are intentional intervention in the money markets, the supply of funds through asset purchasing programs, which is a non-conventional, and they also control inflation and growth by controlling interest rates and money supply, which is a conventional tool, right? So tracking the Fed policy outlooks can be a leading indicator for us if they are preemptive, or it can be lagging if they are reactive, right? And we'll discuss more towards the Fed policies once we get to the macroeconomics part of this project, and how we use it to project inflation and growth to give us a bias, right? But a good example is that we have had a long period of growth with high levels of inflation since July 21, right? The Fed saw this and left it alone to encourage the growth to continue to expand. They have kept interest rates low and are just now raising them, and they continue to expand their balance sheets, even though this week alone they said that they will start responding by raising interest rates at no matter what it takes and tightening the money supply, which would be considered preemptive. And a reactive example would be them responding to economic shock like the 2020 COVID situation, where they use conventional and non-conventional tools to get the economy back on track. But the bare minimum that I look at would be, when it comes to the Fed outlook and policy, is like I always track the official interest rates, money supply growth, Fed target inflation, Fed expected GDP growth, the FOMC meetings that happens 8 times a year, the Fed language which is your Fed minutes, non-conventional policies such as any discussions regarding asset purchase programs, and then the non-conventional, changes within those asset purchasing programs. And so that's how that's the bare minimum, and we're going to discuss a lot more of this in the economic part of this course. But okay, let's move to money supply and what we're going to be covering in this series. So we know that M2 tracks the money supply, and it also incorporates the M1 plus near money, right? M1 only includes cash and checking deposit. That's what most people understand about money, is the M1, right? Near money is safe and easy deposits like securities, mutual funds, etc., etc. M2 is a broader measure of money, stocks and supplies, and growth of the M2 is a leading indicator to future inflation. Now, I'll be teaching a class after this on how money is made, and I'll be debunking a lot of information and educating you guys on how it's made. And this is important because in order for you to be an expert, marksman or a sniper, you got to know the cycles of functions of that weapon system. So if you know how that weapon system functions, you know how it shoots, you know how that bullet flies, it's going to make you take all this into consideration when pointing the trigger at the guy who tried to kill you and your friends, and you're going to shoot him right between the eyes. Alright, so money supply. We don't try to use the M2 to try and correlate growth, but as a confirmation tool to see if it aligns with the bond market and what else, the other leading indicators that we use to track the Federal Reserve's agenda. And in order to do this, we must understand what is normal money supply versus what is abnormal money supply growth. And we do this by using a distribution of returns. And I'll teach you in the next class how to build this workshop. Now, I do not know how to live screen share record yet on Adobe, so I'll just screenshot it and build the classes like I always do. Once I do figure it out, the classes will be a lot more interactive. But however, this distribution of return that I'm about to teach you, you should be able to use this for any stock or any piece of data that you need once you build your own template. All you have to do at that point is download the data and drop it in, and then it calculates everything for you. So now we know money supply has a dynamic relationship with the stock market and the growth of this country, right? However, we also know it's hard to draw correlations from it due to the velocity, which is how quick and effectively it is being used, and that determines the circulation and how fast the circulation goes into the market and where it goes into the market. And this is all due to market mechanisms that changed over time. And that's why we don't use it as a correlation tool, but as a liquidity tool. When the market is illiquid, the Federal Reserve steps in and supplies the money. Remember their mandate. And we can use the month-over-month M2 to see if we are in a normal range or the higher end of that distribution. The higher end is the Fed trying to pump liquidity. And we need to ask these questions when we see that. Does this confirm what I am looking at with my leading indicators, such as the bond or the credit markets? If not, what is the Fed seeing that I'm not? And then we need to go find out. So I outlined our aim, for what we're trying to do. And we're going to go into the next class and start learning how to build this worksheet. But before we do that, we need to understand the government and corporation bonds and how we use those as leading indicators to identify, the liquidity that's in the market, and how we're going to use volatility in the VIX to understand what type of market we're in. So we're trying to understand what type of market we're in using the VIX and the returns on the S&P 500 with a 6-month lag to project where the GDP is. Is it confirming where the GDP is saying we're at? And then we're using the government and corporation bonds and their credits to see what's actually happening, what actions everybody's taking. And this will all once we add the M2 money supply into this, then we'll be able to understand the stock market direction, the possible returns, what liquidity and volatility we're expecting in the future that will give us a bias, which will lead into what stocks we pick to trade. All right, guys, hopefully this helped. Later.